Hello again, this is Dr. Lindsay. And in this video, what I'd like to do is go over real and nominal interest rates. Just as there's real and nominal GDP and real and nominal prices, and the difference is because of inflation, there is also real and nominal interest rates. And again, the difference is inflation. Nominal interest rates, we use the symbol little I for a nominal interest rate, and little r for the real interest rate. Now, the market interest rate, that is the nominal rate. So when we see what the yield is on the 10-year Treasury bond, that is the nominal interest rate. So market rates are nominal interest rates. The real rate of interest is after adjusting for inflation. So say you were to loan some money to a friend at 10% interest. Well, the interest rate, little I, the nominal interest rate, is 10%. Now they're going to pay you back 10%, but are you going to be able to buy 10% more goods with it as you could before? Not necessarily, because there might be some inflation or deflation. So let's say you loan somebody money at 10% and the inflation rate is 2%. Well, now prices are higher when they pay you that money back. So you're going to be able to buy more with it, but not as much. And the real interest rate that you're getting, because there's an inflation, is only 8%. Got to subtract off the 2% inflation. We're using the Fisher equation, which is that the nominal interest rate is equal to the real interest rate plus inflation. Or we can say that inflation minus, or the interest rate, nominal interest rate minus inflation is equal to the real rate. So this Fisher equation the idea came up with it is from Irving Fisher, the same economist who came up with the quantity theory. So in this case above, if we loan somebody money at 10% and the inflation rate was 10%, then the real rate would be 0 after adjusting for inflation. If inflation was higher than 10%, the real rate would actually be negative. Now, if you take a finance class, they're going to give you a formula for calculating nominal and real rates that's different than this. They're right. But there's not that much difference between them. For small rates of interest, there's not much difference at all. But they are more accurate. But it's a formula that's kind of complex. It'll take you a long time to learn it and understand it. Take you a day to try to figure it out and understand it. And you'll probably forget it in about 4 hours. This simple equation is easy to remember. It's easy to understand. And it's the way that we calculate real interest rates in macroeconomics. Now, I said if the inflation rate was higher than the nominal rate, then we would have a negative real rate. It's possible to have negative real rates. And it's also possible to have negative nominal rates, both of them. For a long time, we thought that nominal rates couldn't go below 0. Like, why would you loan money to someone for less than 0? Would you want a positive interest rate if you're going to loan somebody some money? So 0 was considered like the lower bound that interest rates could go down to 0. Now, in the last 10 years, we found that interest rates can actually become negative. The interest rates on government bonds around the world, many of them are negative right now. Let me show you. I'm going to go to CNBC here and take a look at some interest rates of government bonds around the world. Okay, so the date here is February 2021. And of course, as you watch this video, it's going to be something different. But here I'm looking at the yields on bonds. Here's the 1 month bond, 0.03, and the 6 month bond, 0.05. They're not very much. They're pretty close to zero. Look what happens when I go down here to the United Kingdom. Their bonds, the 3 month bonds, are negative. The 1 year is negative. The 2 year is negative. They have these negative interest rates. It means you loan money to their government, and instead of them giving you interest, you pay them. You pay them money to loan money to the government. Bizarre. It's like we're living in some sort of bizarre world. Germany, same thing. The German 1 year bond is negative, 2 years negative, 3 years negative, all the way up. The 7 year, 8 year, 9 year, 10 year, even the 20 year is negative interest rates, a negative yield. You can lend money to the German government, and you have to pay them to loan them your money. The 4 year, it's almost negative 0.75%. The 3 year too, about 0.75%. So interest rates can go negative, but they can't go really too far negative. I think this is about the most I've seen, is negative 0.75%. About 10 years ago, I saw the German bonds, a 10-year bond was paying about 0.5%, and I thought that was awfully low. I didn't think they could go much lower. I certainly didn't think that they could go down below zero and go to negative territory. Here's the Italian bonds. Well, they're short-term bonds, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. They're in negative territory. France, wow. They've got negative yields all the way up to their 10 year. Japan, well, they've got negative yields too. Their 5 years negative. Not too long ago, their 10-year bond was also negative. People have been wondering if it's going to happen to the US. There was a time a couple of years ago when our rates dipped down below zero, but it was just a very short period of time. They didn't stay. Our Federal Reserve that buys the bonds has decided that it's not a good idea. We don't want to have negative interest rates in the US. Australia is still positive, Canada is still positive, and Brazil is positive. So surprise, surprise, it is possible to have negative interest rates. And you're probably saying, why would anyone want to loan money at a negative interest rate? Well, at least it's somewhat safe. Warren Buffett said years ago on their European operations, they could make, I don't know how many more millions of dollars in profit if they were able to just keep their cash under the mattress and not have to store it somewhere where they're getting negative real rates. But if they got to put the money somewhere, you have to pay for the storage. For example, if you have a checking account and you're not paying any interest, they're not paying you any interest on your checking account, but they're charging you a fee for having the checking account, then essentially you're paying a negative interest rate on your money. You're paying them something to hold on to your money. But it's unusual, kind of a strange occurrence, a strange time we're living in here, where many of the government bonds are having negative interest rates. And it's because there's central banks that's printing the money. What they're doing with that money is they're buying bonds with it. They're printing a whole lot of money, buying bonds, forcing the price of bonds way up. And when the price of bonds go up, the yield on them goes in the opposite direction. And as we found out, 0 is not the lowest they can go. They actually can go lower if there's enough purchasing of these bonds. So nominal rates can be positive or negative. What about real rates? They can also be positive or negative. If the inflation rate is greater than the nominal rate, then we're going to have some negative real rates. So let me show you some graphs of real rates in this country. Okay, this graph shows real interest rates going back to the 1950s and up to about 2005. And what they've done here is they've looked at the real interest rate that you can earn on the 1-year T-bill. So the way we do this is we look and say, okay, what is the interest? What's the yield on the 1-year T-bill? And then what's the inflation rate the year after that was issued? And then you can determine what the real interest rate that people earned on that T-bill. So one thing to notice here from this graph is the real rate is not constant. It bounces around quite a bit. And you can also see here, there are times when the real interest rate is negative. Like in the 1970s, real interest rates were very low and into negative territory. And then in 1980 or abouts, real interest rates were very high, almost to 10%. And then you can see there was another period of time there from about 2000, 2005, where real interest rates were negative. They went up a little bit. And then during the pandemic recession of 2020, they've come down again where real interest rates became negative again. So next, let's do some calculations on this real interest rate. Show you how this is done. Okay, so let's decide here what the real interest rates are on these 1-year T-bills. So right now it's February 2021. What I need to do is go back 1 year ago and see what interest the 1-year T-bills were paying. Then what the inflation rate was over the last 12 months and calculate what the real rate was. So first, let me go back to that graph on cnbc.com on interest rates and look at the 1-year T-bill to figure out what it was 1 year ago. Okay, so here is the graph today of the 1-year Treasury. These are the T-bills. Today it is 0.07%. That's what interest rate is. And 1 year ago, it was at 1.49%. So a year ago it was 1.5. Now it's almost 0. You can see that chart of how it suddenly fell. And that was really because of the Federal Reserve's program of buying lots of these T-bills, forcing the prices up on them, the increase in demand, and the rates down on them. So remember this, 1.49 a year ago and 0.07 today. Okay, 1 year T-bill today, February 2021, it's 0.071%. 1 year ago, which is February 2020, 1 year ago, the T-bills was 1.49%. Now to calculate the real interest rate, we need the Fisher equation, which is I equals R plus pi. So if someone bought a T-bill a year ago, they got a yield of 1.49%. And that's the nominal rate. That's the little I. The inflation rate over the last 12 months, we looked it up on that link that you have available to see what the inflation rate is. The inflation rate was 1.4%. So the real rate is the nominal rate minus inflation. 1.49 minus 1.4 is 0.09. So the real interest rate that you would have earned by buying T-bills 1 year ago was barely 1/10 of 1%. Not a whole lot, but at least it's positive. Near zero, but positive. Now, what do you think about people that are buying T-bills today? Today, you can get a whole 0.071% on your money. You loan the government money for 1 year, and you get even less than 1/10 of 1%. What do you think inflation is going to be over this next year? Don't really know. No one's got a crystal ball. But my guess is it's going to be at least 1.4%. Maybe 2%. Probably somewhere in that range. Whatever it is, I know that it's greater than 0.07%, which means I'm fairly certain that right now, as this date that I'm filming this, February 2021, we probably have negative real interest rates. As long as inflation is more than 0.07, which it is, then we've got negative real interest rates. The last numbers were 0.2% for the month of December. And that was just for the month of December. That's greater than 0.07 right there. We multiplied that by about 12. That means we're running at over 2% inflation, which means that we've got real interest rates that are maybe 1 or 2% negative. Now, there's something else you should be aware of. It's called the Fisher effect. So remember, the Fisher equation is I equals R plus pi. This relationship between real interest rates and nominal interest rates. So we just subtract off the inflation rate from the nominal rate to get the real rate. The Fisher effect is different. The Fisher effect is that if inflation increases, it will increase the nominal interest rate, I, 1 for 1. So if inflation goes up 1%, that will increase the nominal interest rate by 1%. I will go up 1%. And the real interest rate won't be changed. Inflation goes up 2%, nominal interest rates go up 2%. So what does that mean for bond prices and inflation? So inflation goes up. That means that nominal interest rates will go up. The Fisher effect. And as nominal interest rates go up, bond prices will fall. So we would expect if these numbers come out with higher than expected inflation, we'll see bond prices fall. And as a result, when these CPI numbers come out, they're very, very careful not to let anybody get any advance information on the numbers that are coming out. They release them all at once. Everybody gets the same information at the same time. Because if you were able to get this information early, and it was something unexpected, then it's going to affect bond prices, and you could get your orders in for bond prices and make money on bond prices going up or down once this information comes out to everybody on what inflation is going on. Now let me show you another graph of nominal interest rates on the 10-year T-note. Okay, this graph shows the 10-year T-note, the US government bond, term of 10 years, going back to about 1960. And when I took a screenshot of this, it was 2015, but I'll extend it out here a little bit. It's kind of gone down much lower. It was down to about 0.5% not too long ago, and then it started to go back up a little bit to where last time I looked it was like 1.1%. Now notice here these big trends. Look what was going on between 1960 to 1980 for 20 years. Essentially, this upward trend in the 10-year interest rates. And then in 1982 or so, there's been this downward trend of the 10-year interest rates. What do you think is the reason for it? Why were in general yields on the 10-year going up 60 to 80 for 20 years? And then for 40 years after that, dropping. In general, the trend was down. Zigzagging along the way, but a downward trend. The reason is the Fisher effect. There was quite a bit of inflation in the 1970s. There was some in the 60s too, but it kept increasing and getting worse and worse in the 70s. In the 70s, we got up to something like, I don't know, it was double digit, over 10% inflation. Fisher effects, as inflation goes up, nominal interest rates are going to go up too. And that's what was happening here. Then in 1982, inflation started coming down. And we went from over 10% inflation to 1.4 recently. And the Fisher effect means that nominal interest rates are falling. So that's why the nominal interest rates on this 10-year are falling for the last 40 years. And as a result, interest rates falling means bond prices going up. Bond prices have been actually a fairly good investment for the last 40 years or so, since 1982 or 83. As these interest rates have fallen, the bond prices have been going up. It's hard to imagine them falling much further. We got down to 0.5. There was a concern that they would become negative in this country. So there's always a chance it could go lower. Trying to figure out what interest rates are going to do is very difficult. And if you can and predict it properly, then you can make a lot of money in the bond market by buying or selling bonds, particularly the long-term bonds. So what we've done in this video is we've looked at real and nominal interest rates. And the nominal interest rate is just that interest rate that we think of as a market interest rate that we talk about. The real interest rate is adjusting for inflation by just subtracting the inflation rate off of that nominal interest rate. And that is the Fisher equation by Irving Fisher. And the most interesting thing about interest rates is that nominal interest rates can go below zero, and the real interest rates can go below zero too. And we can calculate interest rates, whether they're real, if we know what the inflation rate is and what the interest rate was at some point back in time. We can say for sure what the real interest rate was. As far as what is the real interest rate right now, we have to kind of guess a little bit as to what the inflation is going to be to determine what the real interest rate is. But inflation doesn't change all that quickly. It's slow to adjust. If it's 1.5% this year, next year, it's probably going to be somewhere between 1 and 2. It's not going to change by a whole lot more than that. And lastly, the Fisher effect, which is that if inflation goes up or down, it has an effect on the nominal interest rates, but not on the real interest rates. And that means that if inflation goes up or down, it affects the nominal interest rates. And the bonds we're looking at, these yields are all nominal interest rates. As that changes, it will change the value of the bond prices up or down accordingly with inflation.